Welcome. So this is Excellence in Business Communication by John V. Thill, Cortland L. Bobby, okay, edition 12 for business communication. This is what your book looks like, but you have it ebook, all right? So we will be reviewing chapter 3. Always make sure that you reference the instructions on YouTube for this week, okay, where you have chapter 3. Usually it's the midterm, but always make sure because there's some weeks that are off in terms of terms, and this is a pre-recorded video, okay, and this is about the lecture. So make sure that you reference and the instructions in terms of what the assignment is. I'm going to tell you what the assignment usually is, but just in case, so make sure that you reference it. I will be going over the chapter 3, and this is the lecture, okay? This is I think that's it. So usually the assignment for chapter 3, which is a midterm, all right, usually depending on how many weeks the term has, will be chapter 3 is a communication challenges in a diverse global market, all right? And you will be having as homework, but make sure you verify, learning objectives checkup, and you have objectives 3.1 through 3.5 and questions 1 through 8. They are usually at the end of the chapter, right here. I don't know if you can see it, right there. And so you copy and paste those. You highlight, you copy and paste the objectives, okay, these right here. Copy and paste the objectives, and then you copy here, and then you this, let me see. Yes, copy and paste the objectives, and then you copy and paste the questions, and then you highlight the answer, okay? Same for all of them. There's 18 questions for chapter 3, all right? You copy and paste it onto a Word document. Make sure that you title it with your name, my name, business communication, right? BC 110, and then whether you're A501, A500, A500, A501, or A502, okay? And then absolutely, what chapter it is, the title of it. So moving right along, okay, chapter 3 is communication challenges in a diverse global market. You will be learning the objectives for this chapter will be discuss the opportunities and challenges in intercultural communication, define culture, right? Explain how culture is learned, and define ethnocentrism and stereotyping, all right? Explain the importance of recognizing cultural variations and list 8 categories of cultural differences. And then list 4 general guidelines for adapting to any business culture. And then 5 is identify 7 steps you can take to improve your intercultural communication skills, all right? So I'm just basically going to go over the chapter. Remember that you do need to read it, right? And so we start off with the communication. This is kind of an outdated book, okay, because there's some sort of research there. There's a lot of things that have happened, and so I think that the books are adjusting, to reflect the pandemic. But for now, this is what we have, okay? So, they're a little bit, outdated numbers, but nonetheless, I think they're going to be, significant and useful to you, okay? Part of the reason that you take business communication is because everything is business, your career is business, and you have to learn how to communicate within that realm and how to be able to work within, your business, environment, right? Or your work environment, and understanding the environment and understanding the people that you work with can help maybe understand the dynamic, but also cultural differences are so important. There's certain things that, that culturally, are very significant that maybe can be offensive to someone, but maybe doesn't have to be for someone else, and maybe they don't know the difference, right? I had a very important client, and he was very, very important to me. And so one time he came down, he's like, "¿Qué pasó, mamacita?" And he's completely Anglo, right? And and he knows no Spanish, and he came so proud because he was like, I don't know, right? And so I was very offended when he told me that, right? So I don't know who told him what to say, or I don't know what happened, right? So when he told me, I was shocked because it's a business situation, right? And so I was just really, really shocked and really, taken aback. And even if like, anyway, so for me, even in my own culture, like when I was younger, like nobody called us mamacitas. Now it's different or whatever, but back then it was very offensive, even with the person that you were dating. So situations like that, right, that you just don't understand the culture and you think it's offensive, right? It's sort of like, in Hispanic culture, if you for older women, if you call them señoras, which is Mrs., then they're very much offended if they're señoritas, which means they are Miss, right? MISS. That means that they have never been married, that they have never had any type of intercourse or sexual intercourse with that. And so if you call them that they're a señora, that they're a Mrs., they are completely offended, okay? I don't know if it's still going on in my era. It was something that was, that you had to be very careful for. So that's why it's so important to understand cultures, right? So that way you won't, make people uncomfortable or understand where they're coming from, right? If you would have known that mamacita was, like, I'm not out in the street when you call me mamacita, and he thought it was something like an endearing, I don't know, like a miss, or I don't know what happened. And so of course I let it go, but nonetheless, it was very awkward for me, right? And so once you understand the different cultures and, and what it entails and how it is that that what you say or the you interact and how the cultures affect the situation and dynamic, then you understand and it goes easier. I always recommend that when you're in your career and your work, there's nothing better than being very professional all the time and using formalities, okay? That way, you can't go wrong with formalities. For Hispanics, for me in particular, it's very difficult for me to everybody that is Anglo, right, which is American or grew up here or whatever, even if they're older, and they're my clients, they say, call me by my first name. I can't. It would be completely disrespectful for all sorts of reasons. First, because we have a huge age difference, or you're my elder, or you're my superior, or you're someone I don't know. So I'm not going to have any type of informality with you of any kind, because that's not the way the Spanish language is structured, and that's not the way I grew up. I grew up in a very Hispanic Mexican home, okay? So and environment. So I feel very uncomfortable. The other thing is that I'm a Southerner, okay? So I'm from the south of the United States, so that means we're very formal here. We're from Texas. Formality is king. If you tell, if you call, are informal or don't greet people accordingly to a true Texan or a true Southerner, they're going to be very much insulted, okay? It's sort of like going, to a house and you have to eat, right? The other thing is that, in terms of the language, it won't permit me. In Spanish, you use the formal and the informal, and you only use the informal if they're younger than you or if you know them personally, okay? So, and then culturally, I just can't, like, I cannot be at your level or like completely disregard the rules of formality, because I just can't. So it's been very hard for me when I transitioned to having my own business in real estate, because everybody's very casual and everybody talks in first person and everybody uses first names. Oh, another thing is that I'm a teacher, so I'm always referred to as Miss Servin, and I always refer to my to my superiors, right, my bosses, even if they might be younger, or my colleagues by their last name, because our career and yes, our career is based on last names. You don't call your teachers by your first name. So I had a really hard time adjusting. I'm getting better at it, but I just, and everybody knows I'm a teacher, so they sort of suck it up. It makes them very uncomfortable, and it makes me very uncomfortable, but at least we understand the dynamic of it, okay? So really quick there and really long. I'm going to try to keep these, lectures to like 25 minutes max. I'm going to try to, so we'll see how it is. So the first one is listening and learning and leveraging the power of diversity, right? If I have Mexican clients, right, you guys are going to have a lot of, Hispanic clients, and so, you need to be very careful. If you are very informal with an older, with, your elderly patients, they might be taken aback, and they're going to be telling you, no te iguales, like we're not the same, because they're elders, not necessarily because they have more than you or anything like that, just because of the age, right, of the elders, or because there's some sort of respect within the language. So it's important to understand, right, listen and understand the power of it. If you understand it, then you respect the culture and you respect that person, right? And you also understand what might be disrespectful and try to avoid it. All right, it's sort of like Muslims, right? They don't eat meat, and I had a very good friend that was Jordanian, and we went to a Chinese restaurant one day, and they put like pork on his plate. He freaked, like absolutely freaked, okay, because he just can't, it can't even be in the same plate or area, environment that his food or him. So just lots of important things to understand in terms of religion and culture, and why the culture is like that, and that way you can be okay. It also helps when you travel. You can get into a lot of problems traveling. There's a lot of Americans that go to Juarez, to Mexico, with their guns, because here it's okay. You're in a different country, and Mexico, even though there's a lot of guns, right, I mean, but they're illegal, so you can't, citizens technically can't own guns. So if you're traveling cross borders, you're going to get caught, and that is like huge big issue. It has been such a big issue that going down the Zaragoza bridge here in our area, it says no guns are allowed in Mexico, because it becomes a huge problem. So understanding it will create leverage for you and will help you facilitate the area. And then understanding the opportunities and challenges of communication in a diverse world, okay? So language is very, very important. It's part of the culture in of itself, all right? I remember that one day I went to Paris, and I studied French, a lot. Okay, and so I studied all my high school, and I studied all my university. And so what happened is that I had very limited French, right? And so, but nonetheless, I was able to be able to speak and be able to sort of get along, very limited, okay? And what it really taught me that day was that, we were looking, my husband at the time, we were looking for this monument, and we just couldn't find it, and we thought we were lost. So in French, I was telling them, I saw a police officer, and I said, where is this monument? And so so he told me in French, it doesn't exist. And so I was translating, and I was like, that can't be possible. These monuments are, century old, they're like historical, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So I was thinking, this cannot be an accurate translation, because it can't be that the monument disappeared. So all this is going through my head while I'm trying to translate and while I'm trying to understand. And at the beginning of learning, if you're not super fluent in a language, you have to translate, so it takes longer, okay? Once you're fluent, then you don't need to translate, because you just know. But nonetheless, I had never spoken French, like, dialogues or whatever. I had just studied it. So while I was trying to understand what he was saying, because I knew that I was not correct, because it just wasn't, then he starts laughing, and he said, I'm only kidding, it was a joke. And I was like, and then later I'm like, ha ha, because I finally understood it. But understand that the jokes don't transfer over when someone's not fluent, okay? So communication is huge. So that's the language in of itself, but there's also other ways of communication that you don't know exist that have rules and regulations, like the señora, señorita, in Spanish language, okay? The opportunities of a global market are huge, all right? And this is the first learning objective, which is discuss the opportunities and challenges of intercultural communication, not interracial. And so this is the diversity includes all characteristics that define people as individuals. And then you will communicate with people from other cultures throughout your career. Exactly. And now, since it's more global, now you get to talk to people all over the world, okay? So understanding, a bit about their culture and their language is going to be very significant to your success in communication, not only in terms of understanding the language, but understanding the culture. That's why when your resume, if you are bilingual in this area, you're usually bilingual English and Spanish, but if you're bilingual in other languages, I had a Russian student that was bilingual in Russian and English. Okay, so if you are bilingual, it is important to say not only bilingual, but bicultural, okay? Because once you understand the culture, it's one thing to be completely bilingual in terms of communication, but the other thing is being bicultural, which means that you understand the culture, you understand both cultures. You understand the American culture, right, which is the US, but you also understand whatever other, culture you're in. In my case, Hispanic and Mexican particular, because all Hispanics were grouped together. Okay, so there's Puerto Rican Spanish, there's not Puerto Rican Spanish, there's Puerto Rican culture, there's all of South America, and of course Mexican. So even though we're Hispanics and we all speak Spanish, our culture is all very different. So you can have the same language and have the same communication, sort of, but because of the culture, it's going to be very different. And even if we all speak Spanish, we all speak very different Spanish, even the Spaniards, okay? So the diversity in today's workforce brings distinct advantages to business, all right? A broader range of views and ideas, a better understanding of the diverse fragmented markets, and a broader pool of the talent which to recruit, right? Part of like college and part of working in a diverse environment is that you get to see people that you didn't grow up with, that think differently, that have different experiences, that that bring in something very different that maybe you didn't know, right? In my case, I do meditation, stuff like that, and then of course I've traveled a bit, so I try to bring in that into our studies, right? And it is the experience that brings that in. So you all bring our experiences. In our school, we have a lot of veterans, so they're coming in with a lot of like military experience, global experience. They've traveled all over the world, right? So it gives you a much broader perspective of the world and your life, okay? And so the more diversity there is in your career or your job or work, the broader your perspective becomes, and the more different ideas you get, and the more, for good or bad, right? Sometimes you're like, oh my God, or wow, this or that. But, it definitely expands the ideas, okay? And so the company's cultural diversity affects how its business messages are conceived, composed, delivered, received, and interpreted. Exactly. So it depends. And there's also a company culture, which is completely different from all the other cultures, right? From an ethnicity culture or a language culture, all right? And so you have cultural influences, everything about communication, including language, nonverbal signals, word meaning, time and space issues, rules, and human relationships. We basically have gone through most of these. Word meanings are incredible. There's root words, as I told you, everybody speaks Spanish. There's a huge, population of the world that speaks Spanish, but our Spanishes are different, right? I went to Spain, and so you have the Catalan. That is like a completely different dialect. The Spaniards speak very differently, okay? Even within the region, like Mexico has different Spanishes. You have the Northern Spanish, which is a little bit harder. People talk like very, very like a little bit, like harder, like harsh, like louder. They're very more, to the point. Southerners are a little bit more different, they, it's just a different type of language based on the area that they're in, all right? Time and space is huge, okay? I have lots of clients that are not from El Paso, and so I've had to ask, what time zone are you in? Because one time we were waiting on somebody and we didn't get the time zones correctly. So, it didn't occur to anybody to ask about the time zones. So time zones are hugely, that you might have, because you're, because of remote working now, you might have different types of time zones. And so, it might be, I have a client that's French and he lives in France. He's actually Belgium. And so it's a 9-hour difference. So I'm always trying to figure out when he's going to be up, or when, I'm not going to catch him in the middle of the day, or try to catch him, before or after, try not to catch him too late. Hopefully I'll call him and he's not in the meeting. So that most definitely. And then we go on to developing cultural competency, understanding the concept of culture. This is a combination of attitude, knowledge, and skills. And culture is shared systems of symbols, beliefs, attitudes, values, expectations, and behavioral norms. Let me say that again. So culture is a shared system of symbols, beliefs, attitudes, values, expectations, and behavioral norms. If you belong to several cultures, each of which affects the way that you communicate. Absolutely. And then you learn culture both directly by being instructed, or indirectly by observing others. Absolutely. And then we have here, there's a figure 3.1, language diversity in the United States. This is really old data. When I did my master's, and I was doing dual language programs in the schools. I believe that the language most used in the world is English, because it's a business language and everybody knows English. After that, my understanding was Spanish, which is huge, okay, very interesting in Spanish. And then Chinese is like third, even though right here it's further down. But Chinese is third or second. It might have changed just because there's a lot of Chinese, okay? And Chinese is, like we say in Spanish, and Chino. It's so difficult, okay, because it's all phonetic. And then, of course, the symbols are just very different from Western or from English language and Latin, based languages, okay? So cultures tend to offer views of life that are both coherent, internally logical, and complete, able to understand all of life's big questions. Ethnocentrism is the tendency to judge all other groups according to their standards, behaviors, and customs of one's own group. So be careful, because then you think that because you're like this, that's the way they should be, or like that doesn't work, why are they doing that, or whatever, okay? So you have to be very careful with that. Even extreme reaction to xenophobia, a fear of strangers and foreigners. So be mindful of that. Everybody has their ideas, and you can learn, as Mama tells me, you can learn from anybody, all right? So stereotyping is assigning generalized attributes to an individual on the basis of membership of a particular group, right? Mexicans are viewed like they're all we eat is beans, or they call us beaners, which is very derogatory. All those names are very derogatory, so don't do it. They assume we're lazy, right? Just because of the way it's depicted. So be mindful of that, okay? Nobody likes stereotypes, all right? Cultural pluralism is the acceptance of multiple cultures in their own terms. Absolutely. That's what life is about, accepting everybody as they are and living your authentic self. You can avoid ethnocentrism and stereotyping by avoiding assumptions and judgment, and by accepting differences. And for whatever reason, I'm having a really hard time saying ethnocentrism, okay? I think it's my braces, but who knows? So then you have recognizing variation in a diverse world. So that's our contextual differences, cultural context, high context cultural, low context cultural. And so cultural context is a pattern of physical cues, environment, stimuli, and implicit understanding that conveys meaning between the members of the same culture. And then high context is cultures rely heavily on nonverbal actions, environment, setting, and convey meaning. Low context culture rely on an explicit verbal communication, okay? And then you go to legal and ethical differences. You have honesty and respect are cornerstones of all ethnical communication, regardless of culture. Absolutely, okay? And my brother-in-law, who's traveled the world because he's military, he said, even when I traveled, even if I didn't understand the language, I knew when someone was talking about me. And you do. You don't need to understand the whole language to understand that someone's talking to you, okay? Talking about you, I'm sorry. So so honesty and respecting everybody will, is transcultural, okay? Formal rules of etiquette are explicit and well defined, but informal rules are learned through observation and imitation, all right? And so then you have respect and ranks are reflected differently from culture to culture in a way people are addressed and their working environment. The rules of polite behavior vary from country to country. And then you have attitudes towards time, which as strict adherence to meeting schedules can vary throughout the world, right? Mexicans, they go late to everything, which is not good. Americans are very punctual, so are Japanese, okay? So they're very, very punctual, all right? Japanese sometimes will not comment on anything and they'll just nod their heads, and that you think as a Westerner that they're agreeing. That just means that they're hearing. That's it. It doesn't mean that they're in agreement with the nod, okay? So timing is very interesting, and as are body gestures, okay? Cultural around the world exhibit varied degrees of openness toward both outsiders and people whose personal identities don't align with prevailing social norms. And then the meaning of nonverbal signals can The meaning of nonverbal signals can vary widely from culture to culture, so you can't rely on assumptions, all right? So then we go on to age differences. The culture's view on youth and aging affect how people communicate with one another. We already discussed that. And then broadly speaking, men tend to emphasize content in their messages, where women tend to emphasize relationship maintenance. I don't know about that. Maybe before, I think now it's, maybe, I don't know. You guys tell me, what you think. And then gender differences. There is also this whole communication across cultures that looks like this, right? And it's a you versus them. Did you guys get to see that? Yeah. So it's a you versus them, and so you have all the generations here. The radio generation, baby boomers, Generation X, you have Generation Y, and then Generation Z, and of course we have millennials, and I can't remember what the other ones are missing one. Okay, so it tells you there, and it tells you what they are and what defines them. So and that's going to be very important for you to know what they are, who they are, and what the group is. Okay, you have the radio generation. That's when they first got radio, so 1925 to 1940. Those people that were born in the 40s are about 80 years right now, and so so very interesting, right? And then religious differences are important as well. Adapting to other business cultures, and then guidelines for adapting to business culture. An important step in understanding and adapting to other cultures is to recognize the influences that your own culture has on your communication habits, okay? So as we already discussed that, Americans are a little bit more informal than maybe people that speak Spanish or the Hispanic culture, depending, or the Mexicans at least. And so that might create some sort of we already discussed the differences, okay? And then you have guidelines for adapting to the business culture, individualism, equality, privacy, personal space, time and schedules, religion, communication style. Improving intercultural communication skills is crucial to your performance and you being successful. Studying other cultures as well. There's a whole figure 3.2 on components of successful intercultural communications. And then studying all other languages is very important, and it can help you tremendously, okay? There is a table 3.1, doing business in other cultures, understanding the customs, learning about the clothing and food preferences, access political patterns, assesses political patterns, not axis, understand religion and social beliefs, learn about economic and business institutions, and then appraise the nature of ethics, value, and laws, okay? And then you have respecting the preference of communication style, writing clearly, choose words carefully, be brief, use plenty of transitions, address international correspondence properly, cite numbers and dates carefully, avoiding slang, idiomatic phrases and business jargon, idiomatic phrases, avoid humor and references to popular culture, absolutely. Make sure that your phone is off, just like mine, right? So it won't, interfere at all. And then you have speaking and listening carefully. And then, there's some, samples there that you can see. And then using interpreters, translators, and translation software, which now is very available. It used to not be, okay? And they pay very highly if you have a second language, and that language is specific to whatever it is that they're, catering to, or clients if they have, or within the area. And then helping others to adapt to the culture. All right, so that concludes chapter 3. Hope this helped. I went a little bit over, and hope this helped with your with your assignment, okay, and an understanding chapter 3. Namaste, love and light.